People are fascinating, especially up close. More especially when you get them talking about the things that they love. This is From the Hip, conversations in the service of passion, purpose, and play. I'm Adrienne Gunn. You ready to play? What does now mean? Now means the intro is playing? That wasn't a countdown. This is go? That is our official go. Sometimes, hello, I'm still Adrienne. Sometimes our co-producer does not sleep. Have you had that day? I'm having that day. We're having a day. Also, what's cool is we just get an extra day to February, so everything's going to be fine. Okay, hi, I'm Adrienne Gunn. I am here with my new friend,
Janet Allison.
Yes, that is your name.
Yes.
Welcome. I think we might have some shenanigans if anybody's joining us, at some point that video will show up. We've got a way of seeing the things you say to us, if you feel inclined to type or say things to us, which would be kind of fun.
Be very fun.
Yeah, that might show up here. So I'm occasionally going to lean over and click some pages. We shall see. So Janet, you and I met, gosh, it feels forever ago, but it wasn't.
Only 3 months, maybe?
Is that really?
Like that?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, November.
I feel like I've had a lifetime since then.
Well, we definitely had a connection at that moment. I really felt it.
Yeah.
I think you did too.
It was good. Yeah, no, we were both there connecting. We were at a keynote speaking seminar, conference. What would you call that?
Well, it was a weekend, so it was 3 days of keynote speaking. It was a lot.
Yeah. For me, I was attempting to remember that I'm good at that sort of thing. And it worked. By the time, when I stepped in, I felt very unlike myself. And when I left, two wonderful things happened. Don't Stop Believin' Journey was playing on the on the music loop, the playlist, and then I felt like me again. So I'm glad that I got to be there. I don't know.
I loved being there. It was definitely a good reminder of what I have been doing for the last decade or more, and then just meeting people like you, so good. So good.
Nice. Okay, so you weren't there. This was a keynote speaking of intuitive speaking.
Intuitive speaking.
Process from a friend, Danielle Louise Ross. And what was cool, what I loved and why you're here today, was I heard that you have a process of helping people figure out how to work with boys. Mm-hmm. And I was drawn to that because I have a lot of opinions about boys who then become men, or also men. And I have theories and I wanted to talk to you about what the heck that means. And I'm wondering if it would be okay to preface this with, I have a lot of friends in social justice world and a lot of people from different parts of experience. I'm wondering if it might be okay for us to just talk about boys and girls as the concepts and structures that they are, with an awareness that other genders are forming and existing, and there's going to be new research about that. But can we have permission now to just use the structure that we've grown up with?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I always do say, this may be, we're talking about tendencies of boys. It may show up in girls. It may, it's all the gender identities that are being more and more fluid. And so it's inclusive, not exclusive at all. And yes, it's talking about that typical meaning of boys and that presentation of boys.
Yeah, and I'm thrilled about this topic because I have described myself, maybe generally with friends, as having grown up in boy world up to a point of my life, and then suddenly getting estrogen in breasts and things, and then suddenly having a new experience of what life was like, but still remembering that some of my core values are attached to those things that were sometimes explicitly or implicitly the structure of the rules of what it was to be a boy and how to be a person of value.
Yeah.
So I am thrilled.
Well, and I love that you talk about the rules of being a boy, because that's what we're up against right now. I've been doing this work for 20 years. Oh, yeah. I didn't tell you, and you may not know, that I raised daughters.
Okay.
So they're in their mid-30s, and I was a teacher and have my elementary ed degree, and stood in front of this class, my first class of 10 boys and 2 girls, and went, oh, whoa, I don't know what's going on here, but nobody told me about this.
Yeah.
And that was 20 years ago.
Right.
And so I got really curious then, and I've been doing this work for 20 years. And it really is only in the past maybe 5 to 7 years that the conversation has shifted. And we've gotten, before it was just kind of like, oh yeah, boys. Oh yeah, boys. But we need to really focus on girls. And we did, and to everyone's benefit.
Sure.
And now we're looking at boys and we're seeing all the things wrong. Where I really see that we've created a world and a context and messages and rules around what it is to be a boy, and it's the boy code, it's the man box, it's what that structure is around that, and it's not serving any of us.
No, I have this theory. I think it's proving out. I do pretty good with observing of like people and society and such. I think that there's a problem. I'm going to say problem because the better word didn't come to my brain. When people are trying to fight against a pain in any particular new movement, say, they tend to be very insular in their focus, myopic. Like, my joke is, if there was a rash of people getting kicked in the nuts, we would have an anti-nut kicking movement and not recognize the root cause of violence that probably preceded the symptom. And so I say that because when I think about feminism and its many forms back in the 60s, 70s, and earlier, one of the things that happened was the movement was reaching for a thing that existed that they didn't have access to. And oppressed people often just wants the next level up or breaking in, but they didn't see how there was freedom for no one, that the rules of the patriarchy or the rules of masculinity weren't serving anybody, that this idea of like suppressing emotions and suddenly valuing monetary gain and winning and competition and aggression, that those things were like, oh, the feminist movement, one of the first phases of it is like, okay, we need that too. And years later, we're now seeing that we still haven't addressed the roots of how none of that was serving anyone. And it really, I think, goes back to the 1500s when we started prioritizing like brain over body, and it's like deep.
Yeah.
But here we are now, what is it, like a couple years post like a Me Too movement, and several years into generations of sort of confused Peter Pan men, and no one created a vision that I know of, and you have more research, no one created a vision of what humanity could do differently if we weren't just trying to copy the rules of men and what success equaled.
Right. Yeah.
Does this make sense?
Yes, it's deep.
It's a lot of things. I did say a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
And then here you go.
I'll just take that ball and run with it.
Sure.
Part of it, so what I look at going further back is to hunter-gatherers. I look at like how we evolved, and we did evolve differently to meet different survival needs, and that's great. And here we are in 2020, and it's all up, and we have boys who want to wear pink sparkly shoes, and we have and I feel like the message for girls has always been and is very strongly, you can do anything you want, you can wear anything you want, you can feel any way you want. And boys continue even now to not get the same messaging. I was lucky to be born in the decade I was, with more ability for expressing myself than the boys I grew up with. Yeah. Even still. Yeah. Yeah. And then we're at this crossroads too. I work with a lot of parents, and I see that the moms are trying to train, convince, cajole the dads into being these emotionally expressive beings. And, you know, for your son, for your kids, you have to be this way. And the dads are like, wait a minute. I don't know how to do this because I wasn't raised that way. No. It's not innate. I'm willing to try and learn. Many men are. And yet we're holding them to a standard that they haven't yet learned how to be at,
Sure.
even if they want to be.
Right.
And so it's this place of I think that the next generation of boys is going to be more aware of, and hopefully the boys don't cry messaging is, we're dissipating that. It's still so real.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's softening a bit, and that generation, as they grow into becoming adult men, have more of a range of emotions and ability to stand in who they are,
right,
in all the ways.
Yeah, I think the challenge, thinking about, and I'm gonna poke and see if anybody's joined us. See if I have a visual of any of that. I don't think I do yet.
One didn't go live, and I just had to manually do it again.
Interesting.
But it's live now.
Okay, we'll find it. So one of the things, this older husband, who's now being asked suddenly to be emotionally responsive. I remember seeing posts on Facebook World of you remember the pictures of the 80 white men in a room deciding about women's reproductive rights,
right.
And there was this rash of posts going out. It was like all these older white men making decisions, and we're like, we want them to be more compassionate. We want them to how are they possibly going to be more have more empathy and compassion and the ability to listen when those aren't things that we taught them were useful or valuable when they were tiny humans and more receptive to such information. Mm-hmm. Also, I think that it's really challenging to have a bunch of generations whose first introduction into the world is to have a part of their genitalia cut off.
Oh, don't get me started. Or get me started on that.
Yes, no, and that's huge.
Yeah.
Your first introduction into the world is you're trying to figure out, you're in a warm, beautiful environment, and we all have a jolt of oh my gosh, what? We have to suck to get food, we have to breathe different. But then to have part of your anatomy, and technically the most sensitive part of the penis cut off, oops.
Yeah.
And then at somewhere between 3 to 7 or 8, you're now castrated from your emotions, and you're allowed to feel 3. Feel and express anger, pride, and lust. This is my own distillation of what's allowed. So things get spun around in those 3. Mm-hmm. And so also you're given a promise about what the world will do for you. So if you get a great job and a fancy car, you will be endowed with a hot wife who will be always at the sexual ready for your needs. You will succeed at all things. And
if you have 6-pack abs, even better. Because you have to look a certain way too.
Yeah, you have to look a certain way. You have to be really, really strong. And then to recognize, oh wait, not only can you not feel because you weren't trained what emotions are for, or how to utilize or access any of them, or that they were valuable, you also can't feel, I'm just gesturing towards an area, you can't feel the person that you do get to be with, because the way that your body had intended you. I think there's a bit of underlying rage and resentment that exists in the bodies of the men that we get to meet for all of these decades. This is my philosophy.
I'm with you, and I have a few little
I would love to
twists and turns along the way. So I am very much pondering circumcision and yes, there's religious reasons to do it, and yet just what you said, you come into the world, whack, sorry. And then, but we look at, why do we have angry boys? Why do we have angry men? And it starts there, I believe. But I also believe that our boys are mothered, and most boys are home with their mothers. Then they go to daycare with women. They go to preschool with female teachers. They go to elementary school with female teachers. Many children don't have a male teacher until maybe 5th grade, middle school maybe, high school definitely. And so you think about just having that mismatch all the time. And I work with a lot of teachers, and of course you're going to look through your female lens at these children. And hopefully you've had some education about boys learning differently than girls. And yet what I find is that there's not a lot of that out there. It's what I try to bring to schools. And stepping out of that female perspective, stepping out of this context of education that we've said, now the way to learn is to sit still, listen, and learn. And every fiber of many boys' beings is, I got to move my body.
Yeah.
And it's true, a male body in motion can think. The brain is in motion if the body's in motion, but yet our standard is, oh, sit still.
Right.
And look at me
Right.
when I'm talking to you, which is really uncomfortable for a lot of boys and men. And so when we can open up that view and begin to see boys for who they are, not who we want them to be,
Sure.
then we can start to hopefully dissipate some of that anger. I think my 3 emotions for boys is happy, sad, and angry.
Okay.
And angry is probably the top one. The anger is the one that's accepted.
Yes.
Anger
absolutely.
is very physical,
Yeah.
and boys are physical. They're going to express themselves with their bodies before they find their words.
Yes.
And we know that boys come with less vocabulary and way less ability to express their emotions.
Yeah.
So that puts it on us. We have to be able to, once we understand that, then we have to be able to work with that and educate and talk about the nuances of sadness and anger and happiness
Yeah.
and those emotions. I had a mom tell me her 7-year-old son came home from first grade and said, Mom, all the girls are perfect and I'm the bad one. And that just broke my heart, but it also made me realize, no wonder these boys are pissed. Come on.
Yeah.
And no wonder we're looking at boys and men disrespecting women, because they see from such an early age that the girls don't get in trouble.
Right.
The girls get to be the star students, and the girls have the advantages, all the things. And statistics bear it out. In any school,
Right.
boys are the ones that are getting sent to the principal's office at about 95%.
Yeah.
Boys. No wonder they're mad.
Well,
Right?
the other thing is, I think I was in some other podcast of mine, and I was saying that I grew up as a free range kid. I would be out on the streets running around. I would either be home watching TV, or be out playing ball, or biking, or climbing through everyone's yard, and in and out of ponds and that sort of thing. And then my favorite memories of school, I'm thinking about elementary school mostly, were recess times. We had play and moving around and running at the beginning of the day. We had it in the middle of the day, long times. And then in my neighborhood, we would crawl down through what's called Oaks Bottom. It's this nature swamp reserve thing in town in Portland. And we would climb around in there and be out all the time. Yeah. We had lots of movement. I remember the people in my neighborhood trying to get speed bumps for their children that I never saw play outside. Because I don't know when these kids move. We had music and PE. We had PE in addition to recess.
Yeah.
That was like several times a week.
Yeah.
And we can express ourselves with music and art. And those things are just not
They're
happening
not
as much.
happening. And I mean, then, we can go into all the screens and the video games and driving to school. And so you've got this boy who is just a ball of energy, has gotten to school via car.
Yeah.
Expected to go into school and sit down. It's all wrong. It's just wrong.
I remember I was just thinking of childhood and boy world, and I was like, okay, what I miss for this new generation is apparently there's zero tolerance for touching people when they're not. Like, how would I have survived if I wasn't choking my friends, or we weren't hitting each other or slamming into each other, or we did kick wars? There was a lot of energy we were getting out. I keep thinking how wonderful it'd be to have a padded room, to run around in circles and slam against things. Because I used to literally run and then slam myself against lockers to get out energy.
Yeah.
Because I had so much energy.
Yeah.
And many of my friends, that's what we loved about soccer and basketball, was colliding against each other on purpose.
And for boys, that is the way they feel the world. That's the way they feel their place in the world. A boy cannot walk across a room without bumping into something or jumping over the couch or somehow being physically engaged with the world.
Yeah.
And yet zero tolerance. Oh, you cannot touch, but that physical bonding for boys is so, so crucial.
Yeah.
Because they're not doing a lot of talking. I was observing in a school one day, and two boys came together. It was snack time, and they're just like this with each other, and they're really not saying anything.
Yeah.
And I looked and I thought, my old self, before I knew all this, would be like, sit down, and they just wanted to connect with each other.
Yeah.
And they knew in that motion that they're going to be outside playing together at recess.
Yeah.
That was that affirmation of that.
Yeah. Do you remember the old trope where two guys would get in a fight and then they'd be best friends afterwards?
Yeah.
That was how they would work it out. It was the weirdest thing. It showed up in movies all the time. It's like, grr, what? You suck, blah, blah, blah. And then they like duke it out, and then they're hanging out.
Yeah.
Buds for
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah.
I miss it. At some point, I got different hormones and a different ability to drop in with language. I got really grumpy about this too, when all of my dude friends suddenly had like, in the cars with the nitrous, like suddenly like, they had these bodies that were suddenly like powered by testosterone, and I suddenly got dizzy when I spun around on roller coasters, and I suddenly cared about jumping off of buildings because I might get hurt. I'm like, who is this?
Yeah.
What is this about?
Yeah.
But then I could like do things like talk to people and sit for long times.
Sure.
I guess that's
And eye contact.
Cool.
We love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, you talk about touch, and teen boys are the least touched.
yeah.
As parents, we stop hugging our boys at some point in middle school, early high school, because they kind of, they don't necessarily seem like they're receiving it.
Yeah.
But
Also, they smell
still
funny.
need it. They smell just awful. And that's, that's part of it too.
Yeah.
Good old testosterone and puberty. But we need to keep that physical connection, and yet we've shut it down from zero tolerance, don't touch your friends, and also zero tolerance around the things that boys love. Boys love blood and guts and pee and poop and boogers and all that stuff, and it gets shut down early and often, and they're made to feel like they're wrong.
This is like hunter-gatherer stuff.
Yeah,
Probably.
well, yeah,
Like
it's
tracking feces,
right.
cutting open things, knowing what bloods where.
And loving adventure, loving, aliens who rain blood down upon the playground, and that kind of storyline is, it's where boys live. And yet we have in school zero tolerance. We have moms saying, ooh, that's gross. I don't want to hear about that.
Right.
But the moms and the teachers that can engage and find the humor in it, because boys love humor.
Yeah.
And if we can be on board with them and see the humor in the blood and the poop jokes and the fart jokes, and
it's so important.
then they feel like they're being seen instead of being constantly shut down.
Yeah, I have a memory of my good friend's mom. I think she was joking but being serious, that her husband got fully sort of actualized and dropped into his full self at 35. It's like when she's talking about boys and girls developing differently, and she was talking to me because it was on the precipice of nearly being unceremoniously oust from the boy world, but she's just like it's just different for them for a while.
And it is different. And again, we need to recognize that our boys are on a different developmental trajectory than our girls. Even newborn boys are 2 weeks less mature at birth than girls. So we follow that all the way through up until about age 28 is when the male brain, the neocortex, that part of our brain that is in charge of planning, cause and effect, judgment, should I do this or shouldn't I, little discernment, doesn't really come online until 28 to 30. And yet, back it up, we expect 16-year-olds to drive cars, 18-year-olds to decide what they're going to do for their life's work. And no wonder you have boys who are kind of like a deer in the headlight, like, what am I supposed to do? And the brain isn't it will catch up,
Yeah.
but it's not there yet.
I think it's kind of funny that the ability to create other humans comes before we know better.
Right?
Right?
And
Just
maybe
like,
if we knew
we
better,
thought
we
about
would.
it. It's like, that sounds really painful and full of responsibility. But it's like, oh, no.
It's
No,
the
just
good
get it
part.
done.
Let's
Get
have
it
the
done.
pleasure and worry about the other stuff later.
Also, the instance of like drinking and drugs and where that shows up in the development, I didn't quite feel like I got a sense of who I was until like 25-ish. It was like, oh, I felt like I landed that particular year. And thank goodness I didn't do things like drinking and drugs in high school before my brain had fully formed. I had plenty going on to work with. But
Yeah. Well, and now we have access to so much more. So there's vaping, there's pornography, you're earlier and earlier. The first age of viewing pornography, and it's usually a surprise, it's not like they're looking for it, is age 9.
I bet, yeah.
9. And it's a surprise. And if you haven't talked to your kids about pornography and what they might see online, then you're going to have a child who is extremely shocked and cannot unsee what they've seen.
Yeah.
And it's horrifying, and it's happening earlier and earlier. And so the brain discernment, the brain development is not there to be able to process and go, oh yeah, this is that thing, and it's not exactly how I am going to look or how I am going to want to be in relationship with another person.
Right.
But we're not having the conversations.
We're not having the conversations between adults about what we're seeing in pornography.
That
and
too.
Sexuality. Like,
Yeah.
That's a beautifully United States repression that keeps eating its own tail.
Oh, and we think that, oh, the schools are educating our children. And I recently interviewed a person on our On Boys podcast, and she said there are only 10 states that require medically accurate sex education.
Oh, wow.
Medically accurate.
That's sad.
I couldn't believe it. I just was like jaw dropping. Are you serious? And if there is sex education, it's not talking about sex is pleasurable. It's it's the fear. It's, don't get pregnant, don't get STIs, and, consent, respect, yes, but it's that even isn't addressed in just a human way.
There's like the abstinence only.
That too.
This is sex equals all of these STIs, and maybe here's things you can do to prevent them, but also don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. That's just don't ever.
Meanwhile, they're viewing pornography, they're getting messaging from everywhere in the media, music, movies, everywhere that, do it, but it's really quick and there's nothing, we don't have to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And we recently interviewed Peggy Orenstein, who wrote Boys and Sex.
Okay.
And she talks about hookup culture.
Sure.
And how pervasive it is. And it was so interesting because it's like there's this notion that boys are, we're expected to act this way, and I have to do this because all my friends are doing it. But all the friends are going, we're not really doing it, but you think everybody's doing it. And then the girls also have this expectation, but it's kind of this false thing of everybody's doing it, so I have to too. But nobody's liking it.
Yeah.
All of them, the boys that she talked to, were saying, it's not that much fun, and there is no connection, and I don't care about that girl.
Right.
And so it's this myth.
Really disappointing. I don't know if you had this moment of like over and over again in adulthood. I looked forward to being an adult for a really long time. My parents, I didn't really hang out with kids when I was growing up much. I hung out with grown-ups, and then I have many friends that are 10 and 30 years older than me, right? So I kept thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be an adult. I'm going to get to go see live music. Maybe I'll get drinking and sex will happen. I was really certain that those things were going to be awesome. And they're still incredibly disappointing. All of these things of adulthood. It's like, wait,
That wasn't
I've
so
got to
fun.
practice this and be aware of my own self for it to be good, and even something that's pretty okay could get better, but no one knows how. I think it's a package of
Exactly.
I don't
Yeah.
understand. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's probably the challenge too, because how do we offer young people a story when we don't even know what's going on?
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
I know. And so we don't offer the story.
Yeah,
So we don't have the conversations.
it could
Or-
be fun to normalize it for them.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We get these body parts. No one gets really the manual for how to use them.
Right. And please call them by their real names. You know, just like if you have young kids, just start there.
Yeah.
By naming names and not having, you know, the wee wee and all the
Right.
other words that go with it. Start there.
Yeah.
And that's your first sex talk with your kids. So you've done it. So now you can do it some more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that there's an awareness that if your son is 8 and you leave the house somewhere between 8 and 12, and if you left that person alone in the house, they are putting their penis on or in everything in your house. Somewhere that's an acknowledgement, because it's a funny meme that comes up in Facebook world. And
Yeah.
like, but who does teach these people what to do with themselves?
Yeah.
Are-
Yeah. There are people out there doing really good work
Yeah.
in this field. Absolutely.
That
Amy
includes you,
Lang.
yeah, too.
And yes, and
Yeah.
I'm leaving that big realm to the more experts than me
Yeah.
in that. And Amy Lang of Birds and Bees and Kids is fabulous in this area of just really bringing in all of the, you know, what do we need to know and what do we need to fear and how do we know if there's, you know, bad behavior with adults and children and what are the signs, and all of that is we've got to be aware of that and be willing to, again, have the conversations with our boys about all of it.
Yeah.
And it's hard and it's awkward and embarrassing and uncomfortable, but do you want the internet to be your child's sex educator?
Right.
No.
And as you're saying, have the conversations, I'm flashing back onto a transitional point in my world where I was expressively angry and everybody was trying to get me to talk. And what I actually wanted was somebody to shoot hoops with me or play catch, like with a football, or that having the conversations probably isn't sitting still, having the conversations. Having the conversations in that phase is likely going for a walk, shooting some hoops, playing catch, go-karts, and then, you know, like some activity, because then they start talking.
That's
this is my
so
experience.
wise, so wise. And again, as women, we would often approach that as, you know, we want to sit down and have eye contact and and I have so many moms who will tell me, I just want to have a deep, meaningful conversation with my son.
Yeah.
And I say, great, wait till he's 30 and then you probably can. But right now it's going to come in small snippets.
Right.
It's going to come probably when it's not very convenient for you,
Right.
because a lot of times it's at bedtime.
Yeah.
In the car is great.
Cars are good, 'cause
Cars
you're
are
not looking
awesome.
at each other.
Not looking at each other. There's, you know, do something side by side, cooking, go for a walk, shoot hoops, and expect that. And don't over talk, for one thing. Expect that it's going to be just little snippets of conversation that will build up over time.
Yeah.
And then be there and be ready for when he does want to open up. And then to be able to listen without that tape running in your head of like, oh yeah, and I need to make sure I say this. And to just be open and present and just being able to hear what's he's saying, and for your daughters too, but what they're saying, because it's going to be subtle and it's going to be just a little bit, and you're going to so want more, and you're just going to have to wait.
And it's going to come out in jokes,
memes.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm being mindful of time, so I have a decision to make. We're at like 35 minutes or so.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. So you've been doing this work for 20 years, you said?
Yeah.
How has it been to be telling these stories and we're walking into the world with these gifts of insight? How is it being received right now?
Well, in the beginning, as I said, there was like, oh yeah, okay, that might make my life easier as a teacher if I know that I need to get my kids out moving. But I feel the urgency in the last 5-ish years, and I am so passionate, and so this is why I'm on the planet, is to get this information out there. And people are smart. Take the information, mix it around in your world, in your interactions, and use it. Some of it will apply, some of it won't, but you have to know about it. And what I get every single time I have these conversations, either as a speaking or just like this one-on-one, is like, oh, that sounds like my husband. And just the tiniest little revelation, the opening up of just being able to connect to another human being in a deeper way, that just keeps me going. Yeah.
I recognize that this conversation is incredibly important because I think that the pains that a lot of women feel towards and with men are connected with not having figured out how to raise them differently. And I have so many friends that talk in the paradigm of like narcissism and empaths and these like toxic relationships that happen. And I keep looking into the world and recognizing when you have toxic masculinity, unchecked rules, it means that you've got sexual assault. You have people, technically, here's my paradigm. I think we have a generations of traumatized men who don't know that they're traumatized. And when you're cut off from your emotions, you can't have access to your own compassion for others. They even talk about this in power dynamics. I don't know if you've heard about this, but a lot of CEOs and people who rise in ranks tend to have fewer people around them that have similar situations, and money, they say money corrupts, but money and that like power imbalance distances people in the same way that like disconnecting from emotions does. So now we are now starting to talk about how we have these like toxically wealthy and powerful men who are disconnected from everyone else. And
from their heart.
Starts from the moment that we clip them from all sorts of access to themselves. And so the cost of not doing something different are the pains and the abusive relationships and the destroying of the earth, our home, and all of these things are the cost of allowing. And I think people talk about masculinity and patriarchy as if it's something men have chosen for themselves and are pushing that agenda forward. I'm fairly certain they would love more colors of shirts to wear, and I'm fairly certain they would love to be able to express love to all of their friends and touch them. And like the more expansiveness, and I have one last point, I didn't finish that point, but my last point about this is I'm remembering, and this is a weird way to get there, that slaves were able to take the Bible, which was an instrument to help enslave them. They were able to take that, it's like part of the whip. They took it on, and it became a way for them to learn to read. It became a way for them to have churches. There's an interesting way of like, if you then give your oppressor the kinds of freedoms, I know it's like I'm going to stretch here, but if we create more freedom for men who are now currently in power, and we break them from their chains, the rest of us then get to be free. It's a weird thing I've been chewing on. I don't know if I expressed it well or if it makes any sense.
And it's really hard to start at the top. We've got to start with our boys and I believe with our actively parenting dads right now, that there can be a shift in that way. And it's up to us as women too. I really believe that, yes, we talk about toxic masculinity, but there's a whole lot of great men who are striving and want to be better humans. So there's toxic people, and there's a whole lot that aren't. And we have to we have to look at the larger culture and how can we hold that at bay, and in our communities and our families and our one-on-one relationships. I play pickleball, which
sweet.
I love pickleball. I'm like
I'd love
a
to play with you
pickleball
sometime.
maniac. Okay.
I have no idea how to do it.
Oh
but
my
I
God,
will. It'll
so
be
much fun.
Yeah.
But twice it's happened that a man has come onto the court and he's referred to the girls.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the girls are, and I'm like, no, we're women. And so it's those, that's such a little tiny thing, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like that's just a moment when you have to say, hey, wait a minute, we're women, you're men. We're not girls.
Right.
And both of them, I actually want to check in with them later of like, how did that land for you? But both of them were kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But that is so subtle and so little seeming, but it's that, and it's the willingness to speak. And of course, women are speaking up more, but our men also have to be allowed to speak. They have suffered a lot of trauma and a lot of constraint of that man box and how I have to look. We talk a lot about girls and body image. We're not having the conversations with our boys about the messaging they're getting about their bodies, and on and on.
To be strong and fit, they can't feel fear. They have to be on top of. They have to make a lot of money. That's important. What they earn. What else is in there? Stoicness, unfazed. They have to know everything.
Yeah. Be able to fix everything.
Fix everything. Know everything.
Fix things. Yeah.
Yep. Super strong.
Yeah. And they're just human beings, just humans. Yeah.
It's a rough day for them. I have a lot of compassion. Yeah. Okay. So I have this sense that there's this bowl. It's a weird transition to go to random questions that aren't related to this topic.
Or they might be.
Oh. Will they be?
Ooh.
I don't know if we ever got the feed to see whether we're on or if anybody asked us anything. I don't see that here, so I'm gonna let it go. But we've got a bowl. Would you be willing to grab the bowl?
For the bowl?
Yeah.
Reaching for the bowl.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask you this random question.
Okay.
What's your best scar story?
Best scar story. Oh
That's sort
my
of on
gosh.
topic.
I'll tell you a best scar
Blood and
story.
guts.
It's a different kind of scar.
Oh.
And you were talking so much about your childhood and playing outside in recess. It brought to mind my 4th grade, Mrs. Kingsley, red hair in a thing. And we were outside playing kickball. And, when we were kids, we would yell and scream and talk about the rules. And it was all fun.
Yeah.
And I came inside from recess and she called me up to her desk. And I can picture this so clearly.
Right.
The classroom where the desk where she called me up and she, in front of the class, told me how bossy I was and berated me up and down for how bossy I was and how that was so wrong for me to be bossy.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, talk about a scar.
Yeah.
It makes me want to cry even now.
Yeah.
It took me until I was probably in my 40s doing some, deep inner work and communication skills, and that I was able to finally look at that and reframe that into I'm a leader.
Yeah.
And I think about that and I think, would that have been the same for a boy?
No.
And we tend to call girls bossy
When
and we
they're
tend to call boys leaders.
Leaders.
And what is that? And that kept me from stepping into my life because I didn't want to be bossy. Who wants to be bossy? And I was kind of shy, so that fed into it. And until I could reframe that and think, oh, I am a leader. And that was life-changing, turned my life around, and
Just in
never
time.
looked back. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna ask you another question.
Okay.
I feel like I talked a lot. Are you a morning person or a night person?
Depends on the weather.
Oh, that's fair.
Because, who doesn't love a bright, sunny summer morning when the day's going to be hot, but it's still cool?
Yeah. Okay. What else? Okay, what is one thing we don't know about you? I think there are thousands of things we don't know about you.
Thousands of things you don't know about me. I am carrying on the legacy of my dad.
Oh.
And I actually didn't realize it for a really long time. I had a big resistance to my dad my whole life, like a lot of years.
Yeah.
And my mom would tell me, you're just like your dad. You're just like your dad. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. And I started this work, and I was about 10 years into it. And it hit me one day that, oh my gosh, here I am advocating for boys.
Right.
Well, my dad was an executive for the Boy Scouts his entire professional life.
Wow.
And he advocated for boys his whole life. And so our lives really came together in the last 3 years of his life. And I got very connected to him and very close to him, and feel very proud that I am carrying on that legacy for him.
When you were saying that, it reminds me of how lucky I was that both my father and my grandfather were really they were kind. My grandfather used to call me fella.
Oh.
And my dad would call me Andrew.
Oh.
They were very loving about me reaching for things. And I was just thinking about you carrying on this legacy. I remembered feeling very unsafe around older women. Older women in particular, when I was reaching for things that they said were boy things, and shouldn't I, sit with my legs together or sit still, or all sorts of things that I was told I shouldn't do. Like, I remember my 4th grade thing, maybe it was earlier, like 2nd grade, I went over and I said, the boys aren't letting me play soccer. And the older woman teacher was like, why would you want to do that? Uh-huh. She didn't advocate for me.
Yeah.
So a lot of these early years are these instances where the teachers and the older women were the more oppressive to me than the boys and other men around. So I was lucky to have quite a few male teachers when I was growing up. And that felt really cool. But you get to be one of these safe women for young people.
Yeah. Yeah.
My young me was just like, oh, that's amazing. I just had a moment of healing moments of my young self, of teachers actually getting to understand people who are drawn to more physical activities and show up. And
and that it's not always, the outward appearance of a boy. It's many girls, and I definitely advocate for them too. It's just about us understanding other human beings besides ourselves and our lens into the world.
Yeah. Can I say how glad I am that you're around and that you're doing this work?
Please do. I will drink that in.
I was just, when we met, that was part of the deal. And I was like, oh, good. Someone, because I care. I don't know if that could be, I would love to show up for an event and talk about how we can be different with boys and men. And I don't think that's my path. It's just part of the story. I just love that you're on this path. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you. I am honored to be on it. I feel like it's not me. It's coming from somewhere else through me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very honored that you would join me today.
Thanks for having me. This has been so fun.
And then thanks for joining us as well. We'll see you the next time. Let them know where they can find you again, because you have a podcast, right?
I have On Boys podcast. You can find that anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. And I am at boysalive.com.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Janet Allison, thanks for being here. We'll see you later. And then theoretically, we're muted and our outro is playing. Well, that's how that went. Thanks for joining us on this episode. Thanks for watching, listening, reading, imbibing, however you took this in. Thanks for being here. And if you really enjoyed it, I'd love it if you would do all of the things. Like, share, ring a bell, bang a gong, tell a friend, and come back next time. I hope you had as much fun as I did.